In today's retrospective, my guest today is Barbara Moran. Barbara has over 25 years experience working in operations, projects, project management, program management, and change management. Barbara works as an organizational change manager at Westpac, and today's discussion is around change management, its importance in delivering successful projects, some key discussions around its implementation and lessons learned. Hope you enjoy.
So hi everyone, today I have Barbara Moran. Barbara and I worked together at Westpac last year on a ServiceNow program, and we were quite busy to say the least during that time, trying to deliver a high impact project. So Barbara works in the change management space, and I think you've been in that role or in that space for a few years. So I think you've been at Westpac for about 3 years, and prior to that, you were at Mercer, I believe. Did you want to do a bit of an intro or background just on where you've been and how you got into change?
Yeah, so I've been in projects for 25 years, projects, programs, and business transformation. So I've been a project manager, program manager, business operations manager. So I do love, I guess, the way projects allow you to move into different spaces, different technologies, different people and careers. So, with change, what I like about it is you focus more on the people side of things, and the project managers can kind of manage the deliverables, if you will. So I like working in IT and in finance.
So just on the people side of things, right? So some of the things that I've seen in my time in projects, especially in the last 5-6 years, is I think change itself is still fairly misunderstood in terms of what you do and what teams do. So could we maybe start with just some knowledge around that, and why is it still misunderstood? And I think people don't fully understand the value behind what change is and the value it brings to projects. So
there's that quote, I suppose, if you build it, they will come. It's not true. If you build something and it's not utilized and you're not realizing the benefits, or people don't know how to adopt that change, then you're not successful, right? So prior to change becoming a discipline in its own right, when I used to be a project manager, you have the PM working with HR, and you would essentially be, implementing operating models. You'd be mandating exactly the behavior changes that needed to happen. And you didn't take people on a journey. It was a kind of a command type of scenario. With change, what we do is we look at the actual impact to those people, and try to understand what's in it for me. Because where we break down, we've always got the buy-in from the senior level, leaders, from the executive sponsors, and then we lose the buy-in at the middle management layer. So the end users and the people absorbing the change are not always getting the messages about what it means to them, and so then it leads to fear. They hear things like, automation and elimination, and that's a fear factor. Is that my job? What do I do next? So it's about making people feel comfortable through the change, helping them understand if there is, capability uplift required, that we can get them there, and really showing them, why we're doing this. So we don't make changes for the sake of making changes to burn money. So how do we get people to understand and actually have engaged stakeholders? So we do things like stakeholder analysis. We look at who you are, how are you impacted, what do we need to do to make sure that we can maintain BAU with minimal disruption through our go lives, if it's agile, through our releases or whatever. And we plan our engagement plan, and we use multimedia. So there's email, there's brown bags, there's proper online training or classroom training, very limited these days. Newsletters, Yammer. So we try to look at all the media and find something that fits everybody, because there's no one size fits all. So we use all the different media that we have at our fingertips to try to reach as many people as possible.
So when in So when I started, sorry, my first interaction with change, I guess, was going back when I was at Vocus, and it was primarily around just the comms side, as you mentioned, like comms is, includes all of those mediums and et cetera, right? But comms primarily around, let's just make sure we're sending out nice emails, whether it's once a week or once a month or whatever, right? Just to make sure that we are keeping our stakeholders engaged in terms of how the project is doing, in terms of build and delivery, etc. So that's one thing. But then what I've found, or what I've seen, I guess, is that in our time at Westpac, that whole thing where we're doing brown bags and the demos and those training sessions, it's actually quite intensive. And I think depending on, it might be to do with, how complex an organization is or how big it is, etc. It requires a lot of time and effort in terms of planning, making sure, you've got the right people in. So how do you find that in terms of where does that fit when you're working with the program manager or the project manager to make sure they're actually putting all of that into the scope and into the schedule, etc.? Because I think it gets, you have those resource conflicts, right? Because VAs are busy, or whoever else is busy. How do you manage that?
I think, first of all, you kind of have to treat like the program or project manager almost like a stakeholder. If they haven't been engaged with change before, if they don't see the value, they're not going to start opening doors and sharing all of the welcome information that they have at their fingertips. And as you probably saw, when we were implementing ServiceNow, to 6,500 people, so many various different, business groups, we had Westpac employees, vendors, service providers, and everyone had different needs, whether, they actually had integrated into the system already and they were receiving information in one format, or if this was, brand new for them and they had to start creating, things from scratch. So it's really, really important that we have access to everybody impacted by the change, and that we're aware, who these people are. Then we can start our stakeholder interviews and doing the change impact assessments and truly understanding what it is they need from us, and making sure they understand that if we ask for requirements, there are timelines for that. We need to get those requirements, and then once the scope is bedded down and we've actually functionally built a solution, I think that you'll notice that people will always try to fight that, and it's kind of about saying, okay, here we are, we're closing the door on these requirements. Now, this is absolutely how you're going to be impacted, but we're going to, take you through this change. So for me, it's about making sure you have the right conversations with the right people.
So that would be, for example, the key decision makers or the process owners who give us the initial guiding decision. Okay,
Business requirements.
Requirements of this is what we want, and then when we start to engage with the wider groups and the wider teams, then you start to hear, oh, but how come they're telling us this, or they're telling us that, right? And then having that hard barrier to say, look, this is it, right? When we're not moving beyond that line where a line has been drawn, right? So it can become quite tough, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I honestly do believe a project will succeed or fail in the planning stage. It is right then and there where you're defining who you're impacting. We need not think that one or two SMEs in the business can speak for an entire business. So even if we have SMEs, we need to validate, all of our findings, and then we need to ask the questions, share the BRD. Typically BRDs are, they are shared with the project manager, the PM, a couple of the SMEs, and then we get some executive who doesn't use the solution to sign off on it. And that's why we end up in a situation where we can't hit our key milestones, where, we find that we're going to have to do a whole bunch of change requests at the last minute, and we burn money and time. And that doesn't endear us to our stakeholders when you keep having to kind of change that line in the sand, when you keep moving. So I think it's really important to spend more time in the planning phases, than in the execution. If I'm honest, if you had spent that upfront time, you'd probably hit your key milestones and you keep your your steerco happy.
Correct. And so from a BA perspective, it's all about understanding that whole as is state, right? And and so how will you know the as is? That's okay. It allows you to understand, okay, what are we, how are we set up today, and then what do we need to go to? And I think even from a BA perspective, I've seen that knowledge and effort that needs to go into understanding that is sometimes missed because we're so busy trying to just keep progressing it and trying to meet the deadline or milestones, etc. Right?
Yeah.
In the analyzing aspect, you mentioned trying to make sure that we learn everything, that's how everything's is working today, how the users are using, etc. So one of the things that we worked on, or especially the change team that worked on, was the change impact assessment, the CIA. How important is that, and when does the process start for that typically?
So depending on what the deliverables might be, but once the BRD is done, we need to see the tech specs. We really need to see, the architecture change documents and the technology solution for the architecture change diagram. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but we need to see the tech solution basically. So we'll take from the BRD, there'll be the as is to be state, and then the architecture design. Then from a change, we look at the impact to process, tool, policy, people, model. So it is critical that we have the documentation that has been put together by the subject matter experts, that content has been vetted by the impacted groups, that there is, I would say, a change champion. So not just the exec who's going to sign off on it, but somebody from each group who can be that voice for their organization to say, yes, our requirements are covered here. We understand these are the tools, systems, processes, and policies that are impacted, and share that, so then we can go away and build a plan. So whether it be that this particular change might just need a communication, and another one may actually require, proper classroom training or some, support documentation, workshops, whatever it might be. We build our plan off the back of the change impact assessment. It's critical. It's your number one. So once you can do your change impact assessment, then you can really start doing the deep dives into your stakeholder analysis, build out your comms and engagement plan, capability uplift. So, but the criticality is, we're change managers, right? So what is the change?
Yeah. And so the change impact assessment document or piece, that's a critical input into having an effective change management process, right?
Yeah, the whole plan.
So just going back a little step, the inputs into the CIA, you mentioned a couple of things there, right? So how have you found that? Do you always get the inputs that you need at a timely level, or do you sometimes end up doing some of the work around that?
Yeah. So no, because I think people really don't get it. So right now, the particular project that I'm working on, they're looking to have the change approach of strategy in the initiation phase, when the BRD is not going to be, signed off yet. So we're not going to have the ACD, the tech specs, and the solution design. So those come a little bit further in the project phase. And what I think people don't get is that change approach and strategy is the kit and caboodle. It's everything. So it's the change on a page. It's the key milestones. It's all of the change impacts. It is your stakeholder analysis. It is your comms and engagement plan capability. It's everything wrapped up in one. And they want it delivered in that initiation stage, and it's impossible. So that's kind of something you have to negotiate on every project. And I think once people get on board and really understand that, change is absolutely about taking people on the journey, but we're not, too heavily engaged in that upfront phase. We are about, coming in through that planning, execution, and then, delivery, and then post go live, that's really, rubber hits the road then as well. It's not just, doing your business readiness reviews, depending how big the project is, 4, 6, 12 weeks out, and then dropping it at go live. But it's ensuring that change adoption and actually seeing, are we realizing the benefits that we sought to realize at the initial stage?
Correct.
Are people adopting this? Yeah, so that's really critical.
So I'll come back to that point in a second. Just going back to the when you mentioned in your current project, for example, that you're doing they're expecting you to do all of that at the initial stages, where typically it's done a little later on in the project. What's the reason for that, do you think? Is it some sort of is it a mindset thing? Is it an agile thing, or is it just lack of knowledge around change?
I think it's probably lack of knowledge. I think that people think that it might be, people's various different, understanding of what the different collateral is. So I think some people think that the strategy is simply a lofty strategy. At least in the, organization I'm working in right now, it's not just a strategy. Okay, we're going to communicate, and we're going to tell them about the change, and we're going to train them. No, it's actually the detail. So I think that perhaps what's happened is the language is misunderstood. So what you might call an approach and a strategy is actually a well-defined plan. So I think we need to get, our language right across not just, Westpac as an organization or the, IT or finance. It's really, more broad than that. Let's understand, what is included in this collateral, when is it required, and what should it include? And I think that once there's that common understanding, we wouldn't have a situation, because we all understand what's required in order to build out these documents. I think that there's just some misunderstanding on the value, and the timing.
Yep. And so then you mentioned the importance of post go live and making sure we're measuring the benefits and how well was the solution received, how well it's doing, etc. So in BAs, I think there's a similar thing. Are you realizing the benefits, etc. Right? So in terms of doing that, so if we think about it logically, right? So typically what happens is, go live, project's been delivered. You tend to just you go into relaxed mode. Oh, yeah, it's all done, and then people start thinking about other things, right? But I think, and I've seen this as well in my previous roles, is it's like the lessons learned. What lessons did we learn from that delivery? What were the benefits did people get out of it? So why is that important? And then how do you use that to then, what do you do with that information? Does it go back into for that project that you worked on, or does it then sit for an input for something else?
So really, it really depends, right? If we're honest. So let's just say with the ServiceNow implementation, that we worked on together last year. Well, phase 1 was just the 5 core ITIL processes, right? So they were always going to be, release 2, release 3, and such. So those lessons learned are definitely absorbed by the project and taken into the next phases. When you move off a project full stop onto something, say, completely different with a new group or new technology, you do the lessons learned. But interestingly, if I'm honest, I don't think that, again, we as practitioners really do much about it. It's like, when you do a survey and you get this really good intel, and you start maybe an initiative to try to work on that, and then things get busy, and boom, you're on to the next one. So it's really difficult, right? So I think it's taking those messages, pushing them up, and if you've got a really, really strong leadership team, that they can drive messages down. So that, I think that's as a a project person, I wouldn't be able to exercise that across a whole portfolio of programs, but the senior level execs would, and I think maybe it's opening up that dialogue.
And the timeliness of catching or capturing all of that information is also critical, right? Because the more you leave it, for example, like say you do go live day one, and then you're going through that whole defects and enhancements cycle because you're so busy,
Backlog.
if there is, right? And then say 2 weeks down the track or 4 weeks down the track, some of those lessons that were critical and that were in front of mind, they tend to be forgotten as well. So then
Absolutely.
so it's like a catch-22. Okay, like we need to get all of this quick early, otherwise people forget, what did we do well, what did we didn't do well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of that running to standstill, right? So budgets are always being cut. We're having to cut, projects full stop. Large chunks of scope of projects. So the time to then take this intel and almost have this overarching project on top of a project, that actually says, hey, you'd save money, right? Because if we do our jobs well, we would save money. Not many projects, really hit every milestone on time without either changing scope, cutting scope, missing some deadlines. And then all through that, you've got a turnover of staff, right? So you've got to deal with those things that are happening. So sometimes you even have to do some sort of knowledge transfer and upskilling in the middle of a project. If we can just get it right, in the beginning, again, we would be okay, but we don't get it right in the beginning, and we run over time, over budget, under resourced, and then we do get this great intelligence, but we don't really do that much about it, unfortunately, because we're on to the next thing, and because we're just in this, this constant battle.
It's that just continual race, right? From one thing onto the next, and then you just forget about it. That's yesterday's problem.
Yeah, you'll take away, as individuals, we take away our lessons learned, right?
Yeah.
And we'll take them onto our next projects, but to really affect change, it needs to be large, wide scale, and nobody has time.
So can I just go into that a little bit more?
Yeah.
How would you do it in an ideal world, or in an ideal situation? What would you do? I mean, how would you capture it? How would you share it? I mean, what's the ideal?
Well, I think I really do think it's pushing it up at that exec level. So taking away what the key things we need it to do, and we need data, right? So I can't give my opinion and say this is absolutely what I think would have made all the difference. Data, right? Like data-driven decisions, which is probably why I'm in data now, because you can influence people so much better. So it is making sure, and sometimes it's difficult, but when you write down what your critical success factors are at that initial, stage, and everybody's got, their own set of criteria, that you track them, that you take that data. And if you didn't actually realize the benefit, that you thought you were going to realize, or tick that box on that critical success factor, why not? If you can trace that back to some event or series of events that may have impacted that benefits realization, you can take that solid data to build a package, to build the message. And I still do believe that we have to enable our leaders to lead, right? Like, we have to give them the data. It's no point whinging about what worked or didn't work unless we can say, how can we do this better? And get the right people, influencing at that exec level. Because at the end of the day, it does really need to channel down that we're all on the same page, speaking that same language, and everybody, will take their own flavor on a message, and that's great because we're individuals. But just trying to have some consistency.
So pushing, you mentioned pushing data up. So making sure that, your senior managers and upper middle management know what went on in terms of, the delivery and, the pre and the post, I guess, in terms of where we were and where we improved. I mean, I guess that's important. But in terms of, so how in project management, they talk about when you start a project, in that whole initiation phase, whatever, you're also bringing in some of the lessons learnt into the program or project, right? So making sure that any lessons or whatever you learned beforehand, you're also bringing that onto your project, so that you're continually evolving and improving. So from a program perspective or project's perspective, how do you see do you see some solutions where the data that you're sharing up is also then shared in some sort of a central, I don't know, repository, location or whatever? I mean, how do people go about maybe saying, okay, oh, this project was done, whatever, I'm just going to see what were the benefits or what were the lessons learned? Because I think, in my opinion, that's missing, right? I mean, I actually haven't.
It's missing, but I think it kind of, that's again utopia, right?
Utopia.
None of us even have time to grow. Let me see what they did good. No,
Yeah, no.
It has to be real easy, a real accessible. So I'm not going to go back to any project repository and try to figure out who did something maybe a bit better. But if it was glaringly obvious at me on, say, a home page, where I suppose success stories, where we share success stories, and a click here to see. So if we can get our messaging right, it's all about putting it at our fingertips and it being timely. Then I would absolutely read that. So again, that to get on the homepage, you have to be newsworthy, and to be newsworthy, you have to have some data. So we have a responsibility, I think, to absolutely look at our projects and then push it up, and then cross your fingers. If you've done something well, get the good word out so that we can learn, can share.
So then, I know you said you're focusing on the good, but then there's also the bad, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I think that's probably equally, and as you know, it's human nature that we complain more than we talk about the good things, right? So maybe if we had someplace where we see, okay, what were all of the bad things, and we take the inverse lessons from those things, right?
Opportunities to improve, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think why I keep honing in on where I think you succeed or fail in a project, is in your planning, is I have seen that far too often. So for me, I just keep saying engage, get buy-in and craft your solution kind of instead of in a silo, but as wide as you can. Get as much information. I'm not saying get everybody and their dog to sign off on your requirements. No, you'll never get anywhere. But absolutely make sure that you're asking the right questions so that later on you don't end up with the defects, the change requests, the enhancement requests that just keep cycling through for years after a project actually closes down. Yeah. So I think, yeah. So I do agree. So somewhere to put your lessons learned.
Yeah, look, I'm just talking out loud, right? So, and I know I haven't seen it, or not yet. I'm sure some organizations might do it, but it's interesting to mention it here. Now, you mentioned data-driven decisions, right? Yeah. That's probably another thing that I don't think I've seen explicitly in some of the organizations that I've been in. Where do you think is the gap in that being more effective?
Well, look, I mean, so in the business case, so whoever is deciding to kick off the project, so the sponsor, their business case will actually always say, we'll improve efficiencies by X%. So they do, time studies. If we're going to automate or eliminate a particular manual process, there'll be time studies done on that. There'll be cost savings. So, if we're going to decommission a system, because they may do similar things, right? So you can say, okay, we're saving on operational costs, we're changing change costs, we're saving on licensing, et cetera, et cetera. So all of I guess the reasons for the project are spec'd out in the business case. Again, at the plan should always then include those as the actual critical success factors, and then at the end, we should absolutely make sure that those benefits are realized. But what happens if that doesn't happen? We run over budget. We ask for a little more. We try to find money, wherever we can. It's funding from someone else, but we don't actually. Okay, and I've been in projects for 25 years. I haven't seen it. I didn't see people circling back, 3-6 months later. Not because they're lazy. It's just because they've moved on. The workload is just.
It's just, I mean, it's just how things are. So talking from if you look at it from I guess from a lean perspective, how where you're measuring, for example, a process, right? All of the things steps that happen in a process, any process, right? I so the people that are working in that environment who are doing it day to day, they may know what's wrong or where things can be improved. And as BAs, we come along and we might, if we have time, we might actually measure and write that down to this process takes this long, something can be improved, da da da.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, what I've seen as well is when the project team is formed, typically what happens is the time isn't given or allowed to actually go and have a look, how teams are actually working today, right? So the data that we do get in the scenario that you mentioned was it's coming from those people who are in those processes embedded, right? So there is typically you don't get a third party view or someone else looking into it, right? So then if that is our baseline going forward and so I don't know how often that can be inaccurate or it could be a skewed version or view of did we actually meet our achievements or did we actually
meet our objectives. 100%. Because of the nature of projects, nobody actually, even if the requirements change, nobody will go back to the original BRD and update that. I mean, we should, best practice, right? Same thing, business case, maybe there's an addendum that says, hey, this is what we figured out, but then you think, well, why would I do it for the business case? I've already got the money, it's been signed off. So we lose a lot of IP through a project. And so if I was going to go back and look at a project a year or two after, I wouldn't get the real story. The people on the ground, those of us, like, you and I could tell 1,000 more stories about what it took to get our release over the line when we were working together. But that's probably just, here and here. And it needs to be captured, and we need to get better at, as a discipline at making sure that we do that, because those stories, right, that information, it is important. And there will come a time when somebody maybe will be employed to do this very thing, to take a retrospective look back and start driving changes. I heard this saying the other day, and I just loved it. And it's nothing profound, but this guy said, you can't solve a problem with the mindset that created it. We need to change, we need to innovate, and I really think we do. We absolutely do. So how do we drive the discipline of making sure that we retrospectively update our documents, that, we tick the box to get through so we can start executing? How do we make sure that that's an actual discipline that people follow? It's critical. Nobody has the time to do it.
So two questions from that. Is that do you think that fits more into the PMO space? That whole thing?
Come on, all of us, I we call us change managers and the PMO, but really we're all part of this.
No, agreed. Agreed. Because I had the last podcast I did, gentleman Fahim Jafar. He works in the PMO space, and he mentioned the similar thing about realizing benefits, focusing more on realizing benefits. So from a PMO simplistic definition of a PMO, where they are looking to conform or make sure projects are being delivered consistently and the benefits are being realized. The only question I was asking you here is, do you think that could be a function where they could enforce it a bit better?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Now the second, what was the thing I was going to ask you? It's just skipped my mind. Did
I get the job?
I know it sounds like an interview, right? So
I feel like I'm being interviewed.
But
I like the conversation. It's actually very thoughtful.
Yeah, because I get a lot of it. So hopefully, if people join in and they listen to it, then some people may get a lot out of it as well. We were talking about the data and the measuring, etc. So how we were talking about the technicalities of it. So for example, in project management, there's a lot of technical, maybe that's not the right word, technical things you need to do in terms of how you structure your program or your project. Similarly with a BA, some of the things that you need to do to become going through that whole BA cycle. with the knowledge that we were just talking about there, where people have it in their minds, and then we go on to other projects. So one of the key things that I've seen is when people, for example, leave projects or they move into different divisions or different teams, or even if they leave organizations, that's when the loss is really profound, right? Because you don't have access to them or whatever.
Yeah.
But have you been in a situation where you've finished a project, your key project team are actually still there, and then when you're continuing on, so then do you find in those examples where the lessons are actually discussed and the improvements are brought into that new program or project because those same people that were there with you before are now with you here?
I mean, I haven't been fortunate enough to be in that space to actually bring my whole team with me onto a new program. So I couldn't really speak to that.
So not necessarily, not even maybe your team, but maybe you've worked with that same PM or the same architect or maybe the same SME, because I have seen that in my past experience where we delivered one key component or one for this program, and then we were lucky enough that we had the same core group moving on to the next stage, right? So then when we were having, those discussions or those meetings, down the track, oh, do you remember what this happened? Or, oh yeah, we had this discussion or we had this complaint. And then even though we weren't referencing anything in front of us, but it was all front of mind, and those discussions, just all brought it back to you. Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very fortunate situation if you can get it within your organization to have that happen. Otherwise, the only other way to get that is to pay for consultants. Then you get that same experience all the time. But, I'm not against that avenue, but I also think it's really good to use your people and, internally to help build solutions and deliver them. And the only way without having the same people to affect something similar is to drive consistency in our disciplines, right?
Can I ask you another question just on the people aspect? How much of an input do you have in who works in your team? Have you been in situations where you're able to influence who is selected as part of the?
You always kind of get asked for your input, and I always want to work with someone who wears a smile, doesn't take themselves too seriously, is a hard worker, is honest upfront, something's not going right, so is willing to negotiate. Skills, we'll teach, we'll learn, right? I move from project to project and I have to take on a whole new set of learnings every single time. That's fine, so when I heard about ServiceNow, I didn't know anything about it. When I was working, in cloud services, I didn't know anything about Azure and AWS. I learned, right? So you move to each project and you learn. So anyone you bring on, if they're a hard worker and they're intelligent, they'll learn, if you give them the right opportunity. But culture is so important for me, because I think, if you're really happy working with the people that you have to see every day, then you're motivated and then you just deliver. And I think success is just underpinned by the people you work with. So.
And I think that keyword you used was culture. I think that's probably a main one that we look for, right?
Absolutely.
With the I was going to ask you around culture again. So for example, when we're hiring people, if you're in the position where you're hiring new starters to come into your project, right? How often do you see that? Okay, in terms of judging them, in terms of to bring them on, you mentioned all those things, having a smile, that having an open mindset, they're willing to learn, etc. But then at the same time, how do you base their past experience versus education versus where they've worked, whether it's banking industry, tech, whatever? Is there
absolutely. So I've been looking to hire someone to join me on my current program for a while, and so I've had quite a few interviews, and it's really, really difficult to get that mix right. So I still haven't hired, but when I was doing the interviews, there was someone who I thought was great. She seemed to have a lot of experience, but it wasn't technical enough. Like her and the program I'm currently working on, right? It's quite tech heavy, which means you have to have that brain, like, because we're running quite a slim operation in terms of change support. I need someone who can also carry the weight of taking away those technical documents, devouring them, and then dissecting them down into something that I can actually speak to our end users about, right? To our stakeholders. And so as much as good experience in change, top person, just wasn't the right fit, right? So everything has to and it's a two-way street. So if we had hired this particular person, she wouldn't have been happy. So like the interview, and I always say this, right? Like it's always two-way. And I know people say that, I'm just not sure they mean it. It's always two-way. Like, is this going to work for you? Is this going to work for me? And when it works for both parties, that's when you get your rhythm and you're successful and you're happy, you're motivated.
Going back to I just want to quickly go back to right to the beginning when you mentioned you worked in programs, projects, and your career has been spanning approximately 25 plus years.
I know, I'm so young.
So and you mentioned love for working with people, etc. And that's what. So what do you think is a key reason, or why would people want to move into change versus, say, wanting to work in projects? What's the
why?
Okay.
So sell it. I mean, you get
people,
I mean, you get exposure. So if you need your tech fixed, you get exposure to that. If you need to get your fix for analyzing things, so you're an analytical thinker, you get that. If you want to build out presentations and communications, tick. If you like working with people and presenting, you also get that. You get basically exposure to everything. You get all of the various different experiences. And then, you finish, and then you get to move on and meet a whole new group of great people and start again. I that's why I stay, because I don't want to get bored. I don't want to get stale. I want to keep learning, meeting different people, learning new technologies. It's exciting. So
it's exciting. So similar to, for my reasons for working in a BA role is because of that change exposure, right? You're exposed to new things, new teams, different environments, and you can jump into those things if you want to, and if you're qualified, or if you're right fit, you can do that. So with so one of the things that I found was, for example, the PM space, or project management or program management, I think it's quite a niche area. It's very let's just call it, it's quite niche, right? It's like you pigeonhole yourself into that if you want to progress and become a program manager and maybe even a project director or whatever as in the future. In change, I know there aren't really any fancy titles out there, etc. You work in change, and whether you're a change analyst or a change manager. But do you find that there are different flavors of being a change person? Do you get pigeonholed, or is it quite broad?
So as I said in the beginning, I've been in projects for 25 years, and I have been a project manager, and I have been a program manager and a biz ops manager. So like, and the last 6 years in change. So you can, I think, given the right opportunity, you can kind of move to any space within projects. And in terms of change, like every change is different. So the impacted stakeholders, those groups will be very, very different. And sometimes it's a hypercare model, and sometimes it's a bit at arm's length support. So it really depends. What's the project? What's the level of impact? And what are the stakeholder needs, right? So it's always different. The people are always different, right? So the whole atmosphere can be different just based on who's in the project. So I mean, I think that's how, if you can't change what you're doing, you know, you can always change your experience.
Yeah, because so the reason why I was asking that was, for example, as a BA, you could be a specialist in the UAT space, for example, or you could be a specialist in the defects.
No, I love testing.
That's why, we are lucky that we get to work across all those different knowledge areas of being a BA. So no, that's cool. So that was the only reason I was asking. Like, look, are there different areas of change? So
I think if you've got so remember, like, it just depends. So right now, we're running a slim operation on my program. So I am the be all everything. I create, I execute, yada yada. Now, when I was working on ServiceNow, I had a comms manager, I had 2 training leads, I had a grad, I had some change analysts, right? And I got to do what I like, lead, and really like work with the stakeholders. Obviously still getting my hands dirty, but right now, slim operation, it's just me. So yeah, it just depends on the size of the project, on the dollars in budget.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I guess I know we're out of time, or we're close to out of time. So one last question, I guess, is in terms of people wanting to get into change again, what is a good way of doing that? So if, say for example, people who are working in as a PM or project coordinators or as BAs or whatever, and they want to transition into a change environment or change role, how would one go about doing that?
I think it's probably go get ProSci certified, right?
Okay.
That matters to a lot of organizations. And then you're if you're just starting out, you're probably going to have to start at a change analyst level, right? And I think that's no one's too good to do anything, right? But if you come in at that level, see if you like it, and if you're good, you'll just develop and move up, but you may not like it. So I think it's get your certification. It doesn't hurt. Come in, at an entry level role and see if it's something you like. That's what I would say for someone who's kind of just starting out and thinking about change. And
someone who's more seasoned, is that more of a like a context thing, like a networking?
No, I think it's if you've got the appropriate skill set, right? Like, so go for it, apply.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Having the keywords in your resume with all the change buzzwords or whatever.
Nepotism never hurt. Just kidding.
Cool. I think that's so good. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome.
Hopefully, if you would like to come on board again, we can have another chat about change and changing things. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Faisal. That was really lovely.